Welcome to the Bearded Bereans, where we analyze topics of the day in the light of the scriptures. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Bearded Bereans. I'm Jason. I'm here with Cole. And Cole, it's great to be here with you. We've been talking about doing this for a really long time, and it's great to finally get us kicked off and started here.
Yeah, I think 18 months, maybe longer, talking about doing this. So, you know, it takes us forever to do anything, but hey,
Well,
we're here.
yeah, we're here. I remember sitting in this very spot with you next to me, sitting in the chair next to me, talking about doing this. And of course, you're a long ways away, and that was at least a year ago,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
more. Yeah, that might have been almost 2 years ago.
yeah. I think so. I mean, it's been a while, which is crazy to me. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
It sure
But
does.
yeah. So you're all the way up in Montana. How's the weather up there?
It's freezing.
Yeah,
Yep. What
like
everybody
literally
thinks,
freezing, 32 degrees, or
no, what everyone
oh.
thinks about Montana being this frozen wasteland is true.
You don't want anybody else to move
You
there.
should never come here. Stay away.
Yeah. Well,
If you go outside, you literally freeze solid in like 3.5 minutes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know if that's gonna work, Jay.
It's true.
Y'all gonna have to change your politics or something to keep people from coming to see
Nah,
you.
it's too cold.
Yeah, I get to enjoy Alabama, so we have
I like
both.
Alabama.
Mhm.
I was born in Alabama. You know that, right?
Yeah, I knew that. I actually met your dad here. Remember you
Yeah,
had me haul that. What was it? It was a.
it was an elk.
I don't know. It was an elk. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. He seemed to enjoy that, so that's good. It was one he shot on a hunting trip up there, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, good times. We've already lost half our listeners because of the words hunting trip. We we may get banned before we even get started because we're talking about killing defenseless animals.
I have no comment. I don't know what
Murderer.
to say about that.
You're a murderer. That's what you are. Funny, I think
Okay.
we'll get to talk about the premises of people that think that way
Yes, we
later.
will.
That'll be fun.
Yes, we will. So what do you have in your hand there, Cole?
This is a $9 pipe that I bought on Amazon. And I did that during one of those times in the dry and weary land um, when finances were tight. I bought it so I didn't feel the need to buy cigars during that time because I love cigars. Um, but now, because times are tight again, I'm smoking the pipe, which is enjoyable actually. It's growing on me over the
Yeah.
last several days. So, what about you? You smoking something tonight?
Yes. So Max was here a few weeks ago, and he left one of these behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, leave a V.
It's yeah, the Milano.
Yeah, those are good cigars.
Well, I don't think I've had it before.
I enjoy them. I think the smoke output's great. They're consistent. I have had a tight one here and there,
Hmm.
but flavor and burn's always great.
It's not too tight. It's not like a Padron,
Right,
but
right. The Padron is no effort. It's effortless.
right.
It's how a cigar should be. Hmm. Yeah, so that's actually how I got to meet you was through our mutual friend Max, uh, the Ruski,
Ruski.
the Russian.
Where is he, by the way? Should he not be here?
He should be here. He was part of the talks, so for the last, we'll say 18 months, but probably 2 years, maybe longer.
Yeah. So there are three bearded Bereans, but only two at the moment.
Yeah, we'll bring him on hopefully season 2, and he'll definitely add to the show. It's going to be fun. Um, he's certainly the more comedic of us three. At least he likes to think he is,
Well,
and
he's easy to
so
make fun of. So,
he is easy to make fun of. That's true. We do
so
need a
he's
punching bag.
he's like you know how on MASH the announcer you never see him, you don't know who
Yeah,
he is, um, or on Cheers, Norm's wife, right? She's a character on the show, but you never see her.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
or Wilson on Home Improvement, you know,
Mm-hmm.
neighbor, right?
Yep.
That's
Mm-hmm.
Max. He's going to be a character on the show, but you're never going to see him.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah. At least season 1, you won't. I would. I'm really hoping he can make it on season 2, but love that man. I mean, he introduced me to really enjoying Christian liberty, and we'll probably edit this out because I don't want him to get the big head, but I really appreciate him for that because I didn't quite understand what that was before we had met. So,
Yeah. No, he's a good man. I'm grateful for him.
hmm hmm I don't know if I've ever asked you this, Jay. How did you guys meet?
Okay, I'll tell the story since he's not here.
Will he correct it when he comes on season 2?
I,
Okay. He'll affirm everything you say from this point on is true.
now, I don't know if I've ever told him the whole bit of the story. If you ask him how did we meet, he'll start to tell you the story. We're at the same church and there was a men's retreat and we ended up kind of bunking together and hanging out that weekend. There's a little bit more to the story. He's
Hmm
Russian, okay? And this was 20 years ago. And he had only been in the States for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And so he was still very Russian. And he expected everybody else to act like they were Russian too.
Yeah.
But we're not. We're Americans. We don't act like Russians. So there's cultural differences. And he found Americans really frustrating and annoying. And Americans found him really frustrating and annoying.
Mm.
And so
Still do.
we're still do, yes. He's softer around the edges now. Anyways, we're at the same church. We're going on a men's retreat. And one of the pastors talked to me about sleeping arrangements, who was going to be bunking where. And he tells me, look, there's this guy, and I don't have anyone who's willing to bunk with him. And I had been traveling overseas and doing things with missions and different things. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm great with cross-cultural stuff, and, it'll be fine. And I'll bunk with him. So that's how Max and I met.
Yeah. So you were the custodian of Max that week, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
I was. Yep.
hmm
And what's funny is when I met him, I was like, oh, yeah, I see why people don't like him.
Pastor, you were right. This guy's difficult. Mm-hmm.
Yes. But those things didn't irritate me because we had been spending summers in Turkey and other places where we were used to cultural differences. And I knew
hmm
that's all it was. It's just there were cultural differences. He did things differently and, approached things differently. And I was fine with that. It was okay. But out of that, we struck up a really wonderful lifelong friendship.
Yeah, and we talk about him being difficult and all these things, but um, like you say, he's soft around the edges now. But I've never met a more hospitable man. And just freely gives and doesn't expect anything in return. I mean, he's a good man, and I'm happy to know him. The Lord actually brought him to me in a really difficult time, and um, same with you. I mean, both of you guys entered my life at a time where I desperately needed the fellowship, and um, uh, I needed help navigating life at that point with different things that were going on, and so very thankful to God for that. But anyway, so you have some schooling, right? You've been to several different institutions, gotten a couple of pieces of paper with your name on them, and various institutions. Tell me a little bit about your background, education.
My academic background.
Let's do that.
Okay. Uh, yeah, I left Montana in 1999 to go to school at Colorado Christian University and play soccer. It was mostly to play soccer, though I wasn't any good. But I worked hard, so I got to play a little bit. Not a lot, but I got to play a little bit. And um, but anyways, when I got there, everybody had to take certain Bible and theology classes and that sort of thing. And really, I mean, I grew up in the church. I grew up in the Lutheran church, the weird Lutheran church. Um,
The gay Lutherans.
the
Go
gay
ahead and say
Lutheran
it.
church. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't gay when I was, 40 years ago.
fair.
It,
They were
it
on the
was
slippery
just,
slope.
yeah, we were sliding quickly, but I mean, it was not gay. I mean, we didn't even have women pastors back then.
Yeah, yeah.
There was talk about it, but there was disagreement. And I remember in my church, there was people who thought, yeah, hey, it's probably okay. And other people who were adamant, like, no, absolutely not. And now in that church, which is just right up the road here, uh,
Hmm.
there's some flaming wacko woke woman um,
With the rainbow stole and everything.
pastoring that church.
Hmm.
Anyways, I grew up in the church, uh, but really, um, religion started to become something important in my life when I graduated from high school. And so I went to CCU, and it was just becoming a thing for me, Christianity. And so we had to take these theology classes, Bible classes, and I remember sitting in my Old Testament class, and I had never really read the Bible or anything, and just starting to see the pieces come together, and I was like, wow. And so I changed my major to biblical studies and didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I needed to study the Bible. And so that's what I did, and got involved in some mission stuff while I was there and afterwards, and then went uh, back to Colorado Christian University to do a master's degree in education, and then ended up in the mission field for a little while. Came back to the States for a little while, pastored for a little while, and the church where I was pastoring um, was gracious in helping me pay for another degree at Reformed Theological Seminary, and that was quite wonderful. And
Hmm.
actually, while I was there, I had thought about going on to get my PhD and maybe teaching or doing something with that. But about halfway through my graduate program at RTS, I was like, yeah, I'm not nearly smart enough to interact with these people, so I'll stop there.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if that changes in the next 5 to 10 years if the Lord allows it. I think you'll end up with a PhD. But that's just me. That's just me thinking. You're lowly layman. Uh, you're certainly, I think, capable of that. So, um,
Yeah,
and I'm sure.
I could do it if I wanted to.
Hmm.
I'm just
Yeah,
going to keep telling myself that. I just
yeah.
don't want to.
The fact is, you don't tell yourself that, obviously. So someone has to tell you for you. So yeah, that's cool. And so the man, I got to read some of the things you did at RTS, and uh, really enjoyed your work on John Knox, and it was really at a fortuitous time, a providential time, um, in the subject matter you were dealing with. I think it'd be worth just a brief explanation of what you did there. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, I ended up finishing it right around COVID time
Hmm.
and government lockdowns and that sort of thing. So there's lots of talk within the Christian church about um, resistance to government and whether that's biblical and when you can and if you can and that kind of thing. And which was great because these are all questions that nobody had been addressing before in the church, largely speaking, sort of the popular evangelical world. And I had been working on Knox and uh, as for my thesis project,
Hmm.
and the project specifically focused on his letter titled um, the uh, gosh, what is it? The trumpet against the monstrous regiment
Monstrous.
of women.
Yep.
Yep, the sound of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women, which was an argument against Queen Mary in England. And his whole thing was that it's unbiblical and unnatural, actually, is really his argument, for a woman to reign, for a woman to be regent, for a woman to be a ruling queen. Um, and so my thesis looked at that, and the whole point of it was to see whether or not he was holding the same position as other reformers were, or if he was like way off the wall in cuckoo land, just kind of making stuff up.
Mhm.
And um, so I think I demonstrated, or at least attempted to demonstrate, that his position is identical to Calvin's position on authority and very similar to Luther's position and some of um, the Lutheran views coming out of Marburg, um, and and certainly I attempted to show that his position was congruent with the teaching in Romans 13, that God delegates specific authority to government, and that authority is limited by nature. He doesn't delegate unlimited, sort of unilateral, absolute authority to the government. He delegates very specific authority to do very specific things. And when the government goes beyond that, that's the definition of tyranny. Then that they're taking power that was not given to them and then seeking to wield it. Um, and Knox says that is the very definition of tyranny. And when it happens, you should resist it because it's
Yep.
evil when it happens.
Yeah. 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 And we were at a time when there were many churchmen and pastors alike arguing for um, a absolutist view of state authority. And of course, I think they would balk at that description, but that's what it is. And so, it came at a time where uh, the issue was forefront, and um, I think it was certainly helpful for me to further uh, my understanding of historical theology, but also the issues surrounding Romans 13 and various other passages dealing with authority. And so, definitely, is that even available? Like, does RTS publish master's theses?
I think so.
Yeah.
Um, I think so, but don't quote me on that. I don't know. It might not be. I mean, I know that I read some other theses um, when I was
Thesis
doing
is easier.
when I was doing my own research. So it might be in the RTS library. I'm not sure. If there's
Hmm.
any people out there who are struggling with insomnia and they'd like to read it, just send us an email. We'll shoot you a copy.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you doing with a dolt like me? You got all
Dope.
this dolt, DOLT.
Oh, well, I
That
don't see
was that
many other
was
people around, so
yeah. Yeah. Well, so that's cool. Educated well as far as RTS is concerned. I love RTS. I definitely envy your time there. Uh, so the Bearded Bereans, I mean, that's really something that we settled on the name because you'd already mentioned this. This is something that we tend to do anyway. But why Bearded Bereans?
Well, there's two parts to the name: Bearded Bereans. And one simple glance at you and I might reveal the bearded part. Um, but there's a reason why you and I are bearded.
Mhm.
Okay. It's not only because we're lazy, though I can't imagine shaving every day or even every week.
Why would you want to do that?
Well, I have
Why
no
would you want
idea.
the face? Why would you want face like woman, as Russians would say?
Okay. So I was given a coffee mug recently by a teacher of mine on which she had a quote from Augustine that summarizes a portion of what we're about here. Here's the quote from Augustine. He says, "The beard signifies the courageous. The beard distinguishes the grown man, the earnest, the active, the vigorous, so that when we describe such, we say, he is a bearded man." So, yes, we've chosen the name Bearded Bereans partially because we're bearded and it's, kind of catchy, but also part of we're just describing a bit of what we are attempting to be. Now, I may not be courageous and vigorous and all of those things, but I would like to think that I am, and I would like to strive towards being that. So that's the bearded
Yeah.
portion. Can you tell us a little bit about the Berean portion?
Sure. Yeah. There is a passage, and you kind of have some of the same background, which is interesting with you growing up Lutheran. I grew up Baptist, right? And you could look at any phone book. You could what are those? You could look up in Google a Baptist church near you, and odds are you're going to find Berean Baptist Church somewhere
Yep.
in your vicinity, right? That's a big thing in the tradition that I grew up in, and
They're all
uh,
over in the South.
yeah, oh
When I
yeah,
go visit my dad, you drive down any county road and there's a Berean church somewhere.
yeah, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, the premise is certainly good, but we were always encouraged to be Berean. Well, what does that mean, right? And I've heard you say that you guys were encouraged in that as well. Um, but there's a story. You got Paul on a missionary journey, going all sorts of places, turning the world upside down. He goes into Thessalonica, and he's ran out of town. Jews don't receive him. They start causing all sorts of mischief, and so he leaves and he goes through a town called Berea, however you want to say it. And in the passage that is particular to what we're discussing was Acts 17, what is it, 11? Is that right?
Yeah. 11 and 12.
Yeah, I didn't write that down. And I only wrote down 11 because it really kind of um, hits where uh, I think we want to be. It says, talking about the Bereans, it says, the people were more noble minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, and they examined the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. So Paul was coming in, he was teaching the Jews, he was giving them the glorious gospel, the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy that they held dear, and they were going to the scriptures to see if what he was saying was accurate. And um, they received what he said with eagerness, like, man, if this is true, let's check this out. And we want to model that, right? We want to model um, hearing a claim, whether it's gospel oriented or if it's just a regular everyday fact or some claim being made. We want to be noble minded. We want to take this, receive it, and see if it's so according to the scriptures, according to reality. We could telescope that out as far as you want, but the idea is we don't want to be like the Thessalonians, right? We don't want to just reject out of hand something that upsets us, right? R.C. Sproul has this quote that he says a lot. This is actually how he became Calvinist. Uh, he had this written, I think it was in his Bible or on a pulpit somewhere. It says, "You are required to teach what the Scriptures teach."
Yep.
Right? It's that is the ultimate. That is the principle. That is the standard, and we're to view all things in light of the Scriptures. And so, I certainly endeavor to do that. I really try not to be the person that dismisses things out of hand. And I don't want to be blown about by every change of doctrine, and just accept something because someone tells me. There's two ditches on each side of the road. And so as a Berean, we want to take those claims and examine them and then adjust our position accordingly. And that's a very it takes a courageous person to do that, because often it will put you at odds with somebody if your position is changing. And so you got to be willing to do that, be willing to be honest with the text, and not let traditions override truth. It's not to say traditions are bad, traditions are good, and that's, we want to be within the Christian tradition, of course, but um, there are certain, um, R.C. Sproul again called them love lines, that people tend to hold on to things that aren't necessarily true, and it's very hard to move someone off that. So I don't want to have those. I want to examine all of my traditions in light of the Scriptures, and I want to be willing to change if the Scriptures say what's being claimed they say.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Cole, it takes a bearded man to do that.
yeah, I was hoping you'd pick up that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Hence, bearded Berean. It's almost it's almost redundant to say bearded Bereans then, right?
yeah,
Bereans
yeah,
are
yeah.
by nature bearded in the Augustinian sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
At least the way we're using the terms.
Yes.
And here's the thing. I think this would be a good time to say it. You know, one of the things com- that really knits us together, I think us three, you, me, and Max, is a commitment to unity. Um, where one of the things about receiving something someone says is you will either reject it or approve of it, but that process should never be divisive, right? Unless you're talking about something that's, primary importance. If we're talking about, the deity of Jesus, virgin birth, Trinity, if we're talking about those things, sure, be ready to divide over those things. But whenever it's a secondary doctrine and beyond, we got to be very careful with how we deal with our brothers, because one of the things the Lord prayed for, Acts 17, the high priestly prayer, is unity. And we need to receive that unity that's been given and protect it and guard it. And um, so we have some plans for how we want to demonstrate that, and I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, the Lutheran is your brother, the Presbyterian is your brother, the Baptist is your brother. Remember that. You can disagree, but disagree in a way that does not break fellowship, that you can
Yeah.
enjoy
Yeah.
dinner with, or dare I say it, a beer or something like that. So um,
Yeah. I
obviously,
hope
weaker
that.
brother, stronger brother principles apply, but
Yeah. Of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I hope that becomes a feature of our show, is our commitment to unity, and not just our commitment to it, but they're actually going to seek it and try and work that out some. I've been a member of a Lutheran church, a Baptist church, and a Presbyterian church, and I'd be happy in any one of those three.
Yet you retain your Baptist identity, right?
Yes. Right. So Presbyterians think I'm a Baptist, Baptists think I'm a Presbyterian. Lutherans, when I go to their church, they think I'm a Lutheran. Because they think everyone is Lutheran, even if they don't really know it,
Hmm.
or at least they should be. Um,
Yeah.
but no, I mean, I've retained some of my Baptist identity. but I say that with hesitation because there's a lot of things I disagree uh,
Absolutely.
with the Baptists. There's
Yeah.
a lot of things I disagree with the Lutherans, a lot of things I disagree with the Presbyterians, but there's a lot of things I agree with all three of them on. And
Hmm.
so I really see myself as kind of a hybrid, um, with similarities overlapping between all three of them. So I'd be happy in any one of those three churches.
Jay, you are a unicorn. You are a mythical creature, is what you are. You're a unicorn. Which, if I say that about you, I'm saying that about myself and Max. So
Yeah, because you two are the same.
fairly, very similar. It's been interesting in our discussions how we handle disagreements and try to work through those. Which I wish we could model for everybody, and I think we will at some point. But um, there's no reason to get in your feelings, and we're talking about you know very important things, but we need to be able to do that logically. We need to be able to do that as if we're still in the same family, and that's important to us, I think. So,
Yep. Yep. Good. So as we go throughout this season and further ones, hopefully that feature stands out as we go. Um,
yeah, yeah. Should we
so
tell them the plans of what we're wanting to do to work that
yeah.
out, or should we? So, there's a psalm, and it's escaping me right at this moment. Of course, but um, how sweet and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell in unity. And it says it's like the oil flowing down Aaron's beard, right, onto the edge of his garments. And so we're going to have specific talks. We're going to have a season, but we're also going to have kind of one-off interviews, specific talks called Berean beard oil, and it's all about unity, all to understand someone that is different from us, and really maybe even ask tough questions, but really seek to understand the other's position and enjoy the complexities of God's world and the study of God. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. It's great to bring people on and seek to understand their position. You
Hmm.
know, so often in life, in the church, in the family, we discuss things with people we disagree with so we can argue with them and tell them how wrong they are and how they should really think the way that I think. And of course, the whole purpose of debate. I used to teach debate at a high school, and the first thing I told them on day one was the purpose of debate is not to defeat the other person and get the other team to say, "Oh, yeah, you guys are right," but rather the purpose of debate is one to clearly articulate your position so that the other side can understand it, and two, to understand the other side's position so that you can get to know each other better and interact in a more genuine, valuable, purposeful way.
I mean, it's
The whole
not to destroy your opponent because Ben
no,
Shapiro destroys people.
no, that is not the purpose. Of course, you can't have that sort of debate with crazy people, right?
Right.
A lot of times he's debating crazy people, and you just need to
Agreed.
tell him to shut up and you should go do something else with your life than talk to those people because it's a waste of time.
Hmm.
But when we're talking about Christian brothers,
Yeah.
any debate that we have, the ultimate aim should be that we better understand each other so that our fellowship can be deeper and more genuine.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's important. Um, and so I think a lot of times, especially in modern times, debate has been a dirty word. It's been a four-letter, five-letter word. Um, seven-letter word. Anyway,
Six-letter word.
yeah, yeah. Hey, I'm just spitballing here. But you get my meaning. I mean, there's a lot of people that just don't want to hear debate because it's been modeled terribly. It's been modeled
Mm-hmm.
terribly in the world, but it's also been modeled terribly in the church, and so that's something that we should probably um, work on as a group. So, but and just to clarify, we're actually not looking to debate
Mm-mm.
the brothers will bring on. It's really a dialogue. We want to know more, and should they want to debate these things, we could set those up, and I think those would be fun too. But I want to do it in a brotherly fashion. But actually, one of the most beautiful brotherly debates I've ever seen is between Mike Brown and James White, and they're discussing several different doctrines of grace, several different debates. Now, this is where you're supposed to say I have problems with Mike Brown, um, but that's really irrelevant. They did debate well, and so there has been some good examples of how to debate, but um, there's also you know um, history and culture and Fox News and MSNBC are replete with examples on how not to debate. So,
Yeah. Yeah, one thing we did at the church I was pastoring several years back is we were debating baptism, and we had Baptists in the church, and we had infant Baptists in the church. And actually, on the session, we had Credo Baptists and Paedo Baptists, and we had each side defend the other side. So the
yeah.
Paedo Baptists had to argue the Credo Baptist position, and the Credo Baptists had to argue the Paedo Baptist position. And we did that specifically so that they would have to actually research and dig into it and figure out the nuances of it and where the attacks were coming from and how to defend against those, and then look at the weaknesses of their own position as they looked at the side they were arguing against and see how they could attack that position. It was a really interesting exercise.
So does that mitigate straw man? Seems like it would. Straw man argumentation.
Um, in theory, it does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In theory.
Gotcha. Yeah. So really, I guess we've come up with a statement on what we're trying to do. Really, it's a mission and vision statement, and we've kind of hit around that. You want to go ahead and tell us what that is?
Yeah. Our mission, and when we talk about mission, we're talking about what we actually do. Like on the show, when we come on, what is it that we're going to do? And we talk about vision, we're talking about what do we want to accomplish. In other words, why are we coming onto the show? What's the ultimate end? What's the result that we're looking for? And so our mission is to analyze topics of the day in the light of the scriptures. So a little Berean influence there. And we're seeking to take topics that are out there in popular culture, that are out there in society, that are being discussed in the church. Going back to John Knox and COVID lockdowns, um, government authority, civil authority would have been a topic of the day 3 years ago for us to analyze in the light of the scriptures. And so what we mean by that is we want the scriptures to be the light that we shine upon whatever the thing is that we're discussing. We want the scriptures to ultimately be the standard that we're using to say, yes, this is the way it is, or no, it shouldn't be that way, or this thing is good, or this thing is bad, or this is congruent with reality, or it's not congruent with reality. And so our aim is to do that on here. We take a topic and bring the scriptures to bear upon it. That's our mission and our vision. Why ultimately are we doing this is to enrich the kingdom of God. We want the kingdom of God to be a better place than it is. It's a great place, but we want to enrich it by taking these things that are out there, different topics. Education is one that we'll talk about here in just a moment, and bring the scriptures to bear on the topic of education in order to benefit God's people so that they can take that information and actually use it and apply it in their lives and make the kingdom of God a better place.
So we talk a little bit about, I mean, we grab topics. You mentioned Christian education. why did we settle on Christian education? Obviously, you're doing work now as a principal in a Christian high school. Tell me a little bit about your choice. And we both kind of settled on that, for that being uh, the first thing that we tackle. It's a big topic.
Yeah, season one, the topic for season one is Christian education. That's the topic of the day that we're going to be analyzing in the light of the scriptures. And we've talked about a lot of different topics and a lot of different things. And we always seem to come back to education. And as we look at society around us and the world around us, and we see things crumbling everywhere, we live in the ruins of this once great civilization, and things have fallen apart. The family has disintegrated. Um, you have men claiming to be women and women claiming to be men. You have children in school, and I'm not making this up. They demand and are given litter boxes to put in the hallways, in the bathrooms, that they can use because they think that they're cats, or they claim that they're cats. And when the teacher calls upon them, they meow in class. I'm not kidding. I'm not making this stuff up. Here in Montana, in Missoula, down the interstate here a little ways, this is actually going on in the public schools. And so these are just examples of how our society, our civilization is crumbling all around us. And as we talk about the cause of that, the root of that, like why is this happening? It all comes back to education, and how there has been this ongoing scheme, this ongoing plan, this ongoing effort for the better part of 80 or 100 or maybe 150 years to destroy or to systematically remove the things that made this civilization great, and then replace it with something else. And the result of that is the chaos that we see around us. And so, if we want to talk about fixing that, we have to talk about education. There's lots of other things that go into it as well, but we can't talk about fixing it without talking about education.
So there's a common trope whenever we're dealing with any societal issues, ills, that leftist or secularist will say, well, this is a problem because of lack of education. You've probably heard that a time or two. And we probably need to define what we mean by education, because it is different than what they mean by education. Um, what do we mean by education? And instead of not even what do we mean by education, but what is education according to God's world, God's standard? What is the reality there? What is education?
Yeah, I think Van Til sums it up really nicely, and so we'll use his definition. He says that education is the process of orienting the student or the child to God and the world he has created.
Mm.
It's a great summary. He pretty much takes Proverbs 1:7, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, meaning um, without the fear of the Lord, without starting there, like you don't have anything.
Mhm.
And so God has created this world. It's His. He's defined the meaning of it. He's defined the value of everything in it. He's determined what our relationship is to everything in the world, what our duties are to all the things in the world, whether those are objects or whether those are people. And education is the process of figuring that out. It's the process of taking the child and bringing him up into the world that God has created. The Greeks use the word paideia. It's the word that's used in Ephesians 6:4, where fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, or the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And it's this idea of sometimes it's translated enculturation. That we're enculturating them into the kingdom of God, but it's really the whole world that God has created. That's His kingdom. And so when we talk about education, it's helping the child learn and discover his relationship to all of the things around him. Beginning with God, who is God? What's my relationship to him? And then what has he made? What are these things like? How do they reveal him? And how do I interact with them? And if a child can do that, he's fulfilling God's call in his life.
Mhm. So it's really initiation into God's world.
Yeah,
It
that's a
will,
great way to put it.
yeah. I didn't come up with that on my own. I actually stole that from a famous author, and we'll bring that up here in a minute. But um, so we talk about Christian education. Um, we just defined education, and um, I really would like to kind of work through this a little bit because the world has education, but it's not what you just said. They're not initiating a student into God's world, into reality, right? Instead, they are conditioning a student into the reality that they wish to create. And it seems like a bold claim, but I'm sure by the end of the season, everybody will be on board with that. Um, help me um, work through why we think. So you let me back up. You mentioned all the different problems that are going on in the world. You got kids using litter boxes in public schools. You got men marrying men. Marrying in scare quotes. You have all these things going on that is contrary to God and the world that He created. So how is it that Christian education answers that? How do we get there? Because we're already there, where a different world has been put forward.
Yep.
So what are we doing there?
How do we undo everything that's been done?
It's not possible, is it?
No, it's really not. Which is why we're talking about education, because we're we're looking at a generational solution to these things. It's not as though we can just add a particular course to the local school and okay, that's going to make everything better, and everything will be fine once the next election rolls around. We have to start with the youngest uh, among us at the moment and enculturate them up into the kingdom of God, so that when they have kids, we can enculturate them up into the kingdom of God. And maybe then, with the second generation, you'll have kids whose parents have a biblical worldview and who are brought up in a biblical worldview and who will live their lives within a biblical worldview. Because today, I mean, I've taught in charter schools and I've taught in Christian schools, and even the charter schools that I've taught in have been largely run by Christians and attended by Christians. Um, but the Christian worldview is almost gone
Mm-hmm.
within the Christian family. I mean, it's shocking how enculturated our people have been into secular culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking about education because we've got to be looking 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And how do we prepare that generation uh, to undo the things that have been done?
Yeah. So let's examine that real quick. The secularism has seeped its way into Christian families, churches, and uh, other Christian communities, and we're seeing those communities disintegrating due to that. Right? The Let's talk about the divorce rate amongst Christians. Right? That's a prevalent statistic that's thrown around. Like, you guys aren't any better, and that's really not the proper way to look at it. The question is, why are those divorces happening? Um, and there's many more examples, but I think that's a really good example to work from. So, how is it that secularism has so crept into Christian institutions such as the family and the church, even the state? I will call a Christian institution. Um, how did that happen?
Well, the arbiter of truth, or the standard by which we judge things, has been moved from the scriptures to the individual.
Hmm.
So now, rather than looking to the scriptures to tell me, oh, I can't leave my wife because I'm not happy at the moment, instead I look to myself and I'm not happy at the moment, so I can leave. And what God says about it, His opinion, um, we don't even ask what His opinion is anymore. It's crept into our schooling, it's crept into our churches, it's crept into our preaching. Um, you know, go listen to an average sermon in your average church in your average town, and it's mostly going to be that God's really powerful, and He's here to help you and help you be happy.
Hmm.
And so, how I feel about a thing becomes the real arbiter of how I should deal with it.
Yeah. So, and you've kind of touched on this before, but the public school is that vehicle that has pushed secularism um, into the family, into the church, right? So, um, most, I would say, a majority of Christians were probably educated in a state school. Uh, I don't have any statistic to back that up. That's just my experience. I'm sure it's a lot of people's experience. And so, from a young age, people are taught you can do anything you want to do, you can be anything you want to be, you just got to set your mind to it. It was very much uh, teaching self-esteem, self-worth, self-determination, all these things that are um, antithetical to the Christian worldview. And so, what has been determined to be self-worth, self-esteem, self all these things 20 years ago has become you can be a cat and pee in the hallway if you want. You can do whatever you want to do. So it really blossomed and ballooned, and what seemed to be innocent, innocuous to most people, it really escaped notice, has ballooned into this terrible thing that's destroying lives. And I would argue it destroyed lives even back then. So there's there's clearly been this conditioning that has happened uh, with Christians not even understanding what was going on, accepting things that they ought not accept, because let's be honest, it's easier to put your child in public school 40 years ago rather than sacrifice and get your child a homeschool education. And that problem's only gotten worse. So we'll probably hit public school a lot more in the upcoming episodes, but I really see that as the vehicle by which secularism has, um, it's almost like the Omaha Beach type situation. It's the beachfront. It's the fount
Oh,
of all things secular.
oh, it absolutely is. I mean, it's part of the long march through the institutions that
Hmm.
these conditioners, these planners, um, from the very beginning saw that if you can influence the next generation, then you influence the future, and that's just reality. And so, it's interesting. Um, we'll start to mention C.S. Lewis here in a little bit, but when he gave the lectures that we're going to be referring to in 1947, this was right around the time when the Frankfurt School was just developing and just starting to put forward their neo-Marxist ideas of how to transform a civilization into a communist community. And they had gone around and analyzed, several communist revolutions had taken place. Some of them were successful and other ones weren't. And they analyzed, why was it successful in Russia, but, it failed in other places in Eastern Europe. And they started to look at, well, the economic approach worked in Russia, but it doesn't work everywhere else. And so they started to look at other parts of society that they could use to then bring in their Marxist ideas, hence neo-Marxism, not based solely on economics, but they looked at things like race and other moral issues and homosexuality and different oppressed people in society that they could get to rise up and overthrow their oppressors. There's always an oppressor and an oppressed group. Right? And so they looked at, well, who can we define as the oppressed group to then overthrow the ruling class and set up a new kind of society. So it was just at that time, and they started sending out trained teachers into schools in England and Germany and France. And this was 80 years ago. And they did this knowing that 100 years down the road is when they would see their final success, is when the final solution would finally come about.
Ominous, because number one, you used final solution, and we all know who used that term. But it is a bleak future because we are at the end of that march. We're seeing it all over. It has infected our culture to the point where it is disintegrating before our eyes. And so, really, when we are looking at education, we're looking at rebuilding.
Yeah.
We're not looking at surgery. We're not looking at fixing the problem now. That ship has sailed.
Yep.
And so we're at a point now where it's okay. How do we I don't want to mimic them. I want to do what they did better. I want to do it obviously to the glory of the Lord. I want to bring people into subjection to Jesus Christ. And so that is the important thing. I want to initiate people into God's world. And so we had prepared to talk about the quote that Luther gave. I think this would be a good time to pull that out because it's so good.
Yeah, Luther's a very quotable guy. But here's one of the things that he says. This is Luther. This is 500 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I am very much afraid that schools will prove to be the great gates of hell unless they diligently labor in explaining the Holy Scriptures, engraving them in the hearts of the youth. I advise no one to place his child where the Scriptures do not reign paramount.
Yes.
And this quote actually comes in the middle of a paragraph. And the whole paragraph is this quote just expanded. And at one point he says that any place where the Scriptures do not reign supreme must become corrupt.
How true is that?
Yeah. And that's precisely what we have seen in our educational institutions. When the Scriptures do not reign supreme, when God is not the one ruling over what takes place, when we're not looking to what God's opinion is about what we should do, inevitably and ultimately, the only option is that institution becomes corrupt. It will happen, and it has happened. The Scriptures do not reign supreme in our public schools, and they have corrupted. And corrupt institutions corrupt the people in those institutions. And like you said, I don't know what it is, 90% of our society has come through public education system for generations now. So we
need to get a statistic on that and get the actual numbers. I'm sure it's, I'm sure we can find it somewhere. But
yeah, it's out there. Even if it's 75%. I mean,
heck, if it's 40% of the church, it's too much.
Yeah.
Because the corruption spreads. The only person that corruption ever spread to is Christ, right? And so, talking about leprosy, talking about whatever corruption you want to talk about, he's the only one that never saw corruption.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be careful with what we associate with, what we do, where we put our children. And that is of paramount importance. But I think, as bleak as that quote sounds, there's still hope there, because he calls it the gates of hell, the great gates of hell. Hail. It's raining now, just,
You're
Freudian
from
slip.
Texas. It's okay.
I'm from Texas.
Hail.
We call it like hail. Anyway, so he calls it the gates of hell, but we have a promise from Christ that says he's going to build his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. They're fighting a losing battle. They're
Yep.
taking great gains. They're
Yep.
winning. They're winning right now. They're winning
Yep.
battles, but they're not going to win the war.
Yep.
It's a foregone conclusion. Jesus
Yep.
died. Jesus rose again. He is in the business of resurrecting. And so let's look forward to being resurrected, and let's be a means by which he resurrects Christian culture. That would
Yep.
be a win in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, you said we're talking about rebuilding. We're not talking about an easy fix. We're not talking about a Band-Aid. We're not even talking about surgery. We're talking about rebuilding and recognizing that, largely speaking, the temporal battle. I mean, what I mean by that is temporary, right? The
Sure.
temporary battle here has largely been lost, if not completely been lost. And I think we've got to recognize that. And we've got to start talking about what does it look like when we rebuild? Because we're not just going to reform something a little bit and suddenly our public education system is going to be better. When the next election comes around and we elect new school board members, that's not going to solve anything, right? Yeah. Until the scriptures reign supreme, corruption reigns in its place.
Yeah.
Chaos reigns in its place.
Yeah.
And so until that happens, it won't get any better. And so we're now seeing these institutions all around us crumble and fall, some quickly, some slowly. But the question we're raising is, what are we going to build in the aftermath?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hopeful. It's hopeful because as all this goes on around us, and as our enemies think that they're winning, Psalm 2 tells us that the Lord sits in the heavens and he laughs. Because they're accomplishing his very purposes. As they rage and plan and scheme and do all these things, he sits in the heavens and laughs because he knows they're simply accomplishing what he wants to have happen.
Absolutely.
It's like Job, right? It's like Job and Satan, right? Mm-hmm. God gives Satan just enough power for Satan to do what he thinks he wants to do, but ultimately it serves God's ends, and God just sits back. It says, okay, Satan, you can do it for me.
Yep.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, he's on a leash.
That's right.
And it's a short leash at that. So, without the will of my heavenly Father, not a hair can fall from my head, right? And that works in the micro as well as the macro. So, well,
it'd be a miracle for you if a hair fell from your head, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I need some hair to come back. So this is clearly the will of my heavenly Father, that I be balding, and it actually all. Have you ever seen those cartoons where the guy's hair falls to his face, and that's what happened. It happened overnight. It was pretty crazy. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a great hope. Good way to end our first episode. Actually, no. We can't end our first episode because we haven't talked about the season yet.
Yeah, we got
carried away.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's do that. We've been going at it for an hour and 4 minutes. So.
Yeah, I've been ranting on so-called government education, which is easy to do. But no, this is season 1. We're focused on education, as we've said, and we've chosen to use C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man as our boat that we're going to use as we navigate this river. And so his this essay it's timely, it's prophetic, um, it's it was foreseeing um, from 80 years ago to what would ultimately be happening today. Did you want to give us just a brief little background of what the essay is, where it came from?
Oh, you want me to do that? Yeah. So the book was published. It was a collection of lectures that he gave, as you said, 1947, I believe.
I think so.
Um, and so it is really just three lectures, three chapters, super quick book that is rich. And when I say quick book, I mean you're going to spend some time in it. It's short, but it's very sweet. It's very good. It does a great job identifying the problem before anybody else saw it coming. There were a few others, but he really saw what was going to happen, and he used a paragraph in a textbook, a high school textbook, to point this stuff out, and so he reads a couple of lines and really starts explicating what's happening there, and moves into a discussion of what a student would learn from that, and from there what that student is doing um, uh, over time is losing something of himself just from that paragraph. And then from losing something of himself, becoming less and less human, to really pushing a completely different order of things. I hesitate to use New World Order because that's got baggage. It's used for something else, but that's what it is. He's able to diagnose the intention of people that are teaching this way is to usher in something that's other than traditional morality, traditional values, and really sets up the great war that's been happening since then. So I'm excited because we're going to discuss some very important aspects of the book, and as you say, use it to navigate the problem and how we need to rebuild. We need to avoid some of the same problems our ancestors didn't.
Yep. Yeah, he starts off in chapter one. In the very first line, he says something like, I fear that we have given too little attention to the things that are being taught in our school textbooks. And then he takes this one paragraph from one high school textbook, and he essentially says the philosophy that's embedded in the textbook will ultimately lead to the destruction of mankind as we know it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think he would end in a hopeful manner.
Hmm.
Obviously he was using a bunch of ifs and thens, um, and I'm thankful he was Christian. He knew that the victory was in Christ and that we were going to win. But he also knew there were going to be some severe valleys in between now and then. So, or then and now. So, um, yeah. So we probably need to wrap this up because our good listeners are probably already made it on their way home. Um, if we're lucky, they've continued until this point. Um,
But they have
just want to,
families to tend to, and
yeah,
they
as
should do
we
that.
do.
Yeah.
Right, right. So, really happy for you guys to join us along this journey. We're growing, we're learning as we do this. Hopefully, refining the podcasting craftiness. This is the second time we've recorded this episode, and we've recorded other episodes 15 times. It feels like. So we are excited that you are here with us, and we hope that you enjoy and learn and jump into C.S. Lewis's book with us. Use us
Yeah.
as a companion to help understand this archaic, 80-year-old use of language, and I think you'll be enriched by it. So until
Yeah,
then,
absolutely.
God bless.
Okay, take care.
The kings who fight against my Lord shall taste his wrath and meet his sword.